Welcome, AP World. We are going to take a look at a sample essay and talk about how I think about it as a grader, walk you through which points that I award to it and which points that I don't, in the hopes that it makes you even sharper at writing your own DBQs. We are going to be taking a look at the Mongol growth of the empire essay from the yellow mock. Feel free to practice alongside this. Feel free to evaluate your own essay alongside this as I talk you through the points that I gave and the points that I didn't. So first, I just want to remind you, you should have your rubric out next to you. We are going to be using the 2020 adjusted rubric out of 10 points for AP World History. Remember, that's a context point, a thesis point, up to 5 evidence points, 2 outside, 3 doc-based, 2 sourcing points, and of course, the complexity point. Let's get started. I want you first to take a look at this intro paragraph and tell me how you would score it in terms of context and thesis. So hopefully you notice that this is a really nice intro paragraph. It has a very clear context and a very clear thesis. I'm going to walk you through why I scored it as earning both of the points. So number one, the context is what I highlighted in blue right here. It clearly states that all started with trade routes, which is a nice contextualization signpost. But it also said context for the growth of the Mongol Empire was trade routes or boom of trade routes. Da, da, da. It gives the time period we're talking about. Then it goes into more specifically and talks about the reopening of the Silk Roads that link Asia and Europe, but the reopening of the Silk Road is their clear, specific example of the context they gave. They're justifying it. And then finally, they bring it back to allowed the Mongols to conquer cities and villages. So here it brings it back to the growth of the empire. And that is the key thing. And I think the number one solution, if you were consistently not earning the context point, usually it's too short because students are not including this last sentence, the connection that brings it back to the topic itself. The student gets the thesis point because they give a really clear thesis with an argument, a because, and a counter argument that they start with on the other hand. So I'm going to underline this just to highlight it for you. They say the most important factor, just directly answering the prompt, was the growth of the Mongol Empire from an overwhelming army. And then they actually list their documents. And if that helps you, by all means, go nuts. On the other hand, one might say that the most important factor was their tolerance, right? So they have 2 very clear lines of reasoning, and already this is complex, which is going to make it fairly easy for them to write a complex essay. Let's now take a look at the rest of their essay. We're going to start with their first body paragraph. I want you to take a look at it and tell me how you would score this and why. To get rid of my face over here so you can actually see. I'm zooming in. Cool. So a couple of things that we see here. The most important factor that led to the growth, this is directly tied to their thesis, if you notice. They almost copied and pasted this first part of the thesis and made it the beginning of this body paragraph, because now they're zooming in. They give really excellent evidence from document 2, document 3, and if you scrolled down a little bit, document 5, which they promised in their topic sentence paragraph. So they're kind of headlining this. That is great. And then notice how their evidence is not quote bombs, but rather clear paraphrases of evidence. So as an example, according to the Novgorod Chronicle, the Mongols, surrounded the city of Novgorod and killed the people of the city and went to others. So that's very clear evidence. They're not just summarizing or talking vaguely. It is clearly from this one document, and they cite it. And then this that I'm highlighting in blue is where they're getting the support the evidence piece. They do that for each of the documents they use, which is really smart. So even though they're starting here with this shows, again, they bring it back to grow the empire, become part of Mongol land. This is all bringing it back to the growth of the empire. So as of right here, this student has 2 points for evidence, one for using 2 documents and another for using those 2 documents to support the argument. Now, they use a third document to support the argument down here. That doesn't earn them an additional evidence point yet, but it is a good start, and they only need 1 more. One thing that I will note is sourcing here too. You probably saw that we can call this document into question because, and this is talking about the historical context A, the fact that he was the first European to be allowed, but also this idea of audience. The Mongols could be pressuring him depending on what kind of messaging they want. Take a look here and see if you would award any more sourcing points. So hopefully you noticed that this is another piece here, that he might make it sound more menacing. Again, this idea of author's purpose or audience, depending on how you frame it. So this student also gets 2 sourcing points. Read the last part of this essay and tell me if you would give any additional points to this student and why. So hopefully you notice that this right here is a great piece of outside evidence. I'm going to highlight it in yellow. They started by saying a piece of evidence that goes beyond the documents, which is definitely a phrase you can use, and they threw it onto the back of a body paragraph, which is fine. A lot of you also put it right after the introduction. That is great and has some pros too, in that a reader sees that you're already starting with outside evidence and can sway them towards rating you even more favorably. It really doesn't matter where it goes, it matters that you practice it consistently in the same way. Again, the key thing here is they bring it back to how it unified the empire and grew the Mongol Empire. I think the biggest mistake I see with outside evidence is folks are not connecting it to the topic and connecting it to their argument. They're just throwing in a random piece of context, or sometimes a correct piece of context, but don't take it home to explain it. And you want to make sure that if you're going to go for the outside evidence point, which I think you should, that you're connecting it to your prompt. This is short. This is one sentence. It's going to get them the point. The other mistake that I see with outside evidence that I just want to point out is sometimes students are giving me context more than outside evidence. And in this case, they're really, like I'm saying, connecting it to how it helped them grow their empire. It's not just mentioning, you know, Genghis Khan, who was a famous leader. It's saying Genghis Khan was a famous leader who, because of his leadership tactics, helped to unite the empire. That would be a piece of outside evidence, depending on how you used it. The other thing that I want to point out is the student gets to a 4th document when they talk about document 1, and they name, again, explanation. So at this point, the student has earned all 3 document-based evidence points. Really, really nicely done. They also do an additional sourcing, which I think is a good piece. You probably didn't see it just now because of what my screen can hold, but in case they had done one of the other sourcings incorrect, this would have gotten them the point, secured the point. I would probably give the student complexity because they've scored most of the other points and they keep on pointing out nuance. However, the Khan is converting only to more easily govern Persia, meaning he could only be showing the Persians he's accepting in order to gain power. That's a really nice way to get the complexity point, and I think sourcing in general helps you get the complexity point, as long as your thesis itself is complex. So let's step back and talk about how this student scored and why. This student got all of the points for intro, context, thesis, all of the points for document-based evidence, all 3. So that's 5 points. An additional 2 points for sourcing, that is 7 points, plus 1 point for outside evidence. They only missed the other, or didn't get to rather, the other point for outside evidence. And given the complexity of their essay, I'd probably end up giving them complexity too. Some graders won't unless you get all of the other points. This student definitely secured 8 points, possibly 9. Really nice job. The thing that I really want to stress is even if that student hadn't gotten to that last paragraph, they were far and away at 2, 3 with outside evidence, 2 sourcing points. They already had 7 points by the time that they were at this middle paragraph, which is easily going to be a 3 and possibly a 4. I hope that this was helpful. I look forward to seeing your DBQs.